I never thought a simple bark could change everything. That Sunday morning, the sun was barely rising over the Austin hills, and I felt more alone than ever. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only thing that broke the silence on my porch, until I heard that faint whimper coming from the gate. It was a skinny, dirty puppy with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. And for some reason I don't even fully understand, I felt God had sent him to me. I'd been through so much already, losing my husband, watching my children move away, and suddenly living in a world that felt too small and too empty. But when that dog lifted his head and looked at me, something inside me clicked. It felt like a human gaze, as if he were asking for help, or maybe offering me help, in a way I didn't yet understand. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all his infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for he will never abandon us, for his love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. I looked back at the little dog and noticed he was trembling. I went to the kitchen, got a piece of bread and some warm milk. When I approached, he backed away, startled, suspicious, but didn't take his eyes off me. I bent down, put the plate on the floor, and said, almost whispering, "Trust me, little one. I won't hurt you." And when he took his first lick of the milk, I felt as if something bigger was beginning there, something that not even time could erase. At that moment, I had no idea that, a few weeks later, this same dog, the one everyone called a dangerous mutt, would be responsible for a miracle. A miracle involving a baby, a dry well, and a faith that, until then, I thought I had lost forever. Topic 1. The day I met him. That morning, the sky was covered in an orange hue that made everything look like an old painting. I was sweeping the porch, thinking about the bills and the bodily aches that come with aging, when I heard a soft noise, like a child's whimper. I looked through the fence slats and saw it, a small pit bull, with scarred ribs and the look of someone who had known abandonment. He watched me, but didn't move. He seemed to be debating whether he was worth trusting. I approached slowly, not wanting to scare him. There was something in his gaze that completely disarmed me. I'd always loved animals, but it had been years since I'd had the courage to care for one. After I lost Joe, my husband, the silence in the house became more than I could bear. I grabbed an old bowl, filled it with milk, and put a piece of bread inside. The smell drew him in, but he still hesitated. We stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity, until he approached, slowly, as if to test my intentions. As he began to eat, I felt a tear well up. It had been so long since something so simple had felt good. The next day, he returned. This time, it was cleaner, perhaps because of the rain that had fallen during the early morning. I left food again. It was as if he knew he could count on me. The neighbors started talking. "Mary, are you crazy?" one of them said, laughing. "Those stray dogs are dangerous, especially pit bulls." I just smiled and continued putting the plate back in the same place. As the days passed, he began following me to the gate, wagging his tail. When I spoke, he tilted his head in such a curious way that it made me laugh. I named him Buddy because he seemed like a friend, the kind God sends when we least expect it. And, without realizing it, I began to wait for him every morning. It was as if the sound of his footsteps at the gate brought life back into my routine. I once found an old blanket and left it in a corner of the yard. He lay there, as if he knew it belonged there. That night, I heard the wind and became worried. I got up, went to the window, and there he was, wrapped in the blanket, sleeping peacefully. Something inside me warmed. It was as if, somehow, I, too, had found shelter in him. I talked to him as if he were a person. I told him about my days, about the letters my children rarely sent, about the pain in my hands that prevented me from sewing like I used to. Buddy just listened, sometimes pricking up his ears, sometimes putting his head between his paws. And in that shared silence, there was more understanding than in many human conversations I've had in my life. One day, while drinking my coffee, I noticed something curious. He no longer appeared alone. 2 other dogs began to hover around the gate, but they kept their distance. Buddy seemed to be protecting them. It made me smile. Even the dogs seemed to find family around him. I began to sense that this dog hadn't come by chance. There was something special about his demeanor, a kind of quiet wisdom. He seemed to understand what I was feeling before I even said it. Sometimes, when I knelt to pray, he would come and lie down at my feet, silently. It was as if he were praying with me. One morning, as the sun rose brighter, I noticed he was different. His eyes were fixed on me, but there was a restless glint there, something I couldn't quite decipher. He barked once, twice, 3 times, as if he wanted to tell me something. And for a second, I felt a shiver run down my spine, as if the air had suddenly shifted. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought maybe it was just hunger or some cat noise. But that afternoon, he started hovering around the gate again, restless, looking at the field behind the house, where no one had been for a long time. His gaze unsettled me, as if he sensed something I couldn't see. That night, I dreamed of water. A deep, dark well, and a cry coming from below. I woke up sweating, my heart racing. When I looked out the window, Buddy was there, watching me through the fog. His eyes seemed to glow, as if he'd also seen the same dream. The next day, I decided to follow him. Only this time, he didn't go to the gate. He ran behind the house, to a forgotten field I hadn't set foot in years. The ground was covered in dry leaves. The wind blew hard. And in that moment I felt, without knowing why, that something much bigger was about to happen. That morning, the wind blew gently, but something in the air felt different. When I opened the door, there he was, sitting, waiting. His gaze was serene, as if he already knew I would open it. I took the bowl and filled it with the same warm milk as always, but this time I added some kibble I'd found stashed away. He wagged his tail gratefully, and the sound of the bowl hitting the floor echoed like music on my porch. Each day, our routine became more certain, almost sacred. I would wake up, pray, make my coffee, and their Buddy would be, faithful and punctual. Sometimes I would sit on the stairs and watch the sunrise while he ate. There was no rush, no noise, just that tender silence that only wounded hearts know. I began talking to him out loud, as if he were an old friend. I told stories of my youth, of school dances, of walking hand in hand with Joe through downtown Austin. He listened to everything with sweet attention, tilting his head to the side, as if he understood every word. Sometimes, he even seemed to smile. Time passed, and I realized Buddy was no longer just a visitor. He was a part of my life. My neighbors began to notice. Some greeted me with smiles, others with disapproving looks. "Mary, be careful with that animal," they'd say. "Those pit bulls are treacherous." I'd simply reply, "Not that one. That one was sent from God." One day, I decided to give him a bath. It was a struggle. He was afraid of water, trembling and trying to pull away. But little by little, he let me touch him. As the foam covered his body and the dirt began to run off, I noticed the scars hidden under his short fur. I remained silent. It hurt more than I imagined. As I dried him with an old towel, I looked up to the sky and whispered, "Lord, who hurt this creature?" It was then that I felt a strange peace, as if God were telling me I was healing something far beyond that dog. And in a way, it was true. I, too, had invisible wounds, and Buddy was helping me heal them. As the weeks passed, he began to accompany me everywhere. He'd go to the mailbox with me, wait while I watered the plants, and even lie at my feet when I read the Bible. I loved reading the Psalms aloud. Sometimes, it seemed like he understood every verse. Especially when I read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." One afternoon, a group of children walked down the street and threw rocks at him. I ran out, yelling for them to stop. Buddy didn't react, just lowered his head, silent, like someone who's grown accustomed to not being loved. It broke my heart. I picked him up, even though he was heavy, and carried him inside. "You're safe here," I whispered. Deep down, I think he taught me about forgiveness. I never saw him growl, even when provoked. He was gentle, patient, and always looked back at me with that same affection. I wondered what he had gone through to become that way. And, thinking about it, I realized that perhaps it was the same lesson I needed to learn, to endure pain without losing tenderness. One cold morning, I left the kitchen door open, and for the first time, he came in. He walked slowly, sniffing everything, until he lay down on the rug near the armchair. That simple gesture made me cry. I didn't want to admit it, but he had filled the void left by loneliness. And somehow, I knew he felt the same. I started saving bits of food just for him. A piece of chicken, a slice of bread, a little leftover soup. Buddy waited patiently, unhurriedly. He always looked at me first, as if asking permission before eating. This silent respect touched me more than any words. The days grew longer, and the August heat arrived suddenly. I would place a bowl of cool water in the shade and watch him lie there, breathing slowly. He seemed peaceful. Sometimes he would close his eyes, and for a moment, I swore he was smiling. But the neighborhood was starting to get upset. A man knocked on my gate and told me there were laws about dangerous, loose dogs. I listened silently, but inside something was stirring. How could they look at Buddy and see danger? All he conveyed was love. The following Sunday, I took a piece of meat and called him into the yard. When he came running, tail wagging, I remembered when my children were little. That pure, guileless enthusiasm that only true love possesses. And it was in that moment that I realized I wasn't just taking care of him, he was taking care of me. One rainy night, I heard scratching at the door. I ran and found him soaking wet, shivering. He had come back despite the storm. I grabbed a towel, hugged him, and let him sleep inside for the first time. The sound of his breathing lulled me to sleep. It was the first night in years I slept without nightmares. The next day, I found an old collar I'd put away. I cleaned it and put it around his neck. "Now you're officially family," I said, smiling. He wagged his tail and licked my hand, as if he understood. It was a simple but sacred moment. Over time, walking with Buddy became part of my daily routine. We'd go to the corner where the wildflowers grew and slowly return. He sniffed every corner, curious as a child. I laughed to myself, remembering when I thought I'd never have company again. Some mornings, he'd disappear for an hour or two, but he'd always return. I'd wait for him on the porch, worried, but seeing him return, my heart would soothe. I never imagined a simple stray dog could stir so much emotion. One day, he returned with something strange in his mouth, a torn, dirt-stained blue cloth. He left it at my feet and stared at me. I was intrigued. I kept the cloth, not understanding why, but something about it gave me the creeps. It smelled of damp earth, as if it came from a forgotten place. That night, I prayed. I asked God to show me the purpose of this unlikely friendship. I felt something was being prepared, as if fate were silently moving, weaving a plan I couldn't yet see. Buddy slept peacefully, but sometimes he stirred, as if dreaming. I watched him and wondered, what have those eyes seen? What dark places has he traveled before arriving here? The answer would come soon, and it would be more terrifying and miraculous than I could have imagined. The next morning, I woke to a loud, insistent barking. Buddy was staring at the field behind the house, growling softly, as if something was calling to him. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't stop. And for some reason I couldn't explain, my heart started beating faster. I tried to distract him with food, but he refused. He stood, alert, staring at the same spot. I felt a shiver. The wind stopped. And for a second, the silence was too heavy. Buddy stepped forward and barked again, with a force I'd never heard before. And it was in that instant that I realized, something out there was calling him. Something I couldn't see, but that, somehow, he knew. And I, without imagining what was coming, decided to follow it. Over the next few days, Buddy's behavior became even more restless. He paced back and forth, sniffing the wind, and sometimes stopped, staring off into the distance. I tried to play with him, but he seemed distant, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. At night, he would suddenly get up and go to the gate, staring down the road. It was as if he were waiting for someone. One day, during my morning walk to the market, I overheard two women talking in line. They were talking about an old story that had shaken the neighborhood a few months ago. "Do you remember that baby?" one of them asked, lowering her voice. "The one left near the old road?" My heart raced without me knowing why. I stood still, trying to hide my ears. The woman continued, "They say they never found who did it, and that the little one only survived for a short time. But some swear they hear a child crying when the wind blows from there." The other woman laughed, but I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked home in silence, feeling as if something inside me had awakened. Buddy was waiting for me at the gate, as always. When I called him, he came running, but I noticed something different. There was dirt on his paws, and a small scratch on his nose. He looked tired, as if he'd just returned from a long walk. I hugged him, my heart aching. For the next few days, the baby's story wouldn't leave my mind. I remembered the voices, the women's frightened tones, and the way the wind whispered at night. I began to dream of a child wrapped in blankets, crying, and a dim light coming from a hole in the ground. I would wake in a cold sweat, and Buddy would always be there, watching me. One Sunday, after church, I asked the pastor if he remembered the incident. He fell silent, then replied, "Yes, Sister Mary, it was terrible. They found signs that someone tried to care for the baby for a few days, but then disappeared. The police never found out who it was." I felt a lump in my throat. On the way back, I passed the old road. The wind stirred dry leaves, and the sound of cicadas echoed in the distance. Buddy walked beside me, attentive. Suddenly, he stopped and began sniffing the ground, following the trail as if he knew every inch of the place. My chest tightened. I remembered the scars on his paws, the way he sometimes cried in his sleep. Had he? No, it couldn't be. He was just a stray dog. But what if he'd seen something? What if he'd tried to help, somehow? I pushed the thought away, but it kept throbbing inside me. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked up at the stars. I remembered a quote my mother had said to me when I was a girl: "God uses even the humblest of beings to perform miracles." Buddy's face came to mind, and I felt a tear fall. The next day began with a strange feeling. Buddy didn't show up. I waited, called out, looked down the road. Nothing. The silence was dense, almost painful. I felt an immense emptiness, as if I'd lost a part of myself. I prayed quietly, asking God to bring him back. Late in the afternoon, I heard a distant bark. I ran outside, and there he was, panting, covered in dust. He was carrying something in his mouth. It was a torn piece of fabric, with faded edges and an earthy smell. It looked like a baby blanket. My body froze. I carefully picked up the cloth and pressed it to my chest. It smelled the same as the little blue cloth he'd brought me days ago. I felt my legs tremble. Was it possible? Was he showing me something? I spent the night awake, trying to understand what God was trying to tell me with that. Maybe it was a coincidence. But something inside me told me it wasn't. That there was a bigger reason for it all, for Buddy to show up, for him to choose me, for that cloth to end up in my hands. The next day, I went to the house of the woman who lived on the corner, the oldest in the neighborhood. I told her about the cloth. She looked at me with teary eyes and said, "My daughter, that baby was left near an old well, back on the hill. No one has been there since." That phrase kept echoing in my mind. An old well, I knew that place. It's in the back of a forgotten lot, behind the gnarled trees where children avoid playing. I felt a deep chill. Buddy, at that moment, started barking, as if he knew I'd finally understood. I picked up the Bible and pressed it to my chest. "Lord," I murmured, "if you want to show me something, give me courage." The wind blew hard, and the leaves swayed as if in response. Buddy stood in the doorway, his body tense, his gaze fixed. He knew where to lead me. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was crazy, that an old woman like me shouldn't get involved in police matters. But my heart wouldn't let me be. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of that baby, wrapped in a blue blanket, crying softly in some dark place. Over the next few days, Buddy became increasingly agitated. He wasn't sleeping well, and he barely ate. Sometimes I'd run to the fence and come back, panting. He seemed to want to tell me something. I tried to calm him, but inside me, too, a feeling of anguish grew that I couldn't explain. One afternoon, while I was sewing, he started scratching loudly at the door. I ran to see what was wrong. Buddy looked at me with wide eyes, as if pleading. He barked once, twice, 3 times, and then ran into the field behind the house. I stood there, my heart pounding wildly. I remembered the words of the neighbor, the pastor, the old well. And I knew it was time to follow that calling. Maybe God was leading me through it. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and called to Buddy. "Show me, boy. Show me what you want me to see." He sprinted ahead, running as if he knew the way. Leaves crunched beneath my feet. The air smelled of damp earth and ancient memory. I trembled, but kept going. Each step seemed to bring me closer not just to a mystery, but to something that had waited years to be revealed. Buddy stopped. The wind died. Ahead of us, covered in branches and leaves, was the old well. The stone rim was broken, moss covered everything, and the air felt colder. He began to bark, loud, insistent, almost desperate. My heart raced. I walked to the edge and leaned over. For a moment, all I heard was the echo. Then, a faint noise. A cry. Barely audible, but real. And that's when I realized the baby story wasn't just a rumor. I held the flashlight with trembling hands and shone it into the well. The light flickered, reflecting off the stone walls. Buddy barked incessantly, circling, drawing attention. And in that instant, I understood, something, or someone, was still there. The air grew heavy. My legs felt weak, but I couldn't stop. I screamed for help, my voice echoing in the night. Buddy continued to bark, furious, determined. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was the moment everything would change. And it was there, at the edge of the old well, that I realized that nothing in life is coincidence. That dog hadn't just found me, he'd been sent. And what was about to happen would prove it in a way I could never have imagined. The next morning, I woke with a strange feeling. The sky was overcast, and the wind carried a smell of wet earth, even though it hadn't rained. Buddy had been restless since dawn. He paced in circles, growling at nothing, and his ears twitched as if listening to something distant. I called to him, but he didn't come. He seemed hypnotized. I tried to distract him with food, but he didn't even look at the plate. I watched, uncomprehending. His eyes were fixed toward the fields, and his tail wagged nervously, not with joy, but with anxiety. Suddenly, he ran to the fence, barked loudly, and came back, trying to pull me by the hem of my dress. At first, I thought he was just joking. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Buddy, stop that boy." But he continued, more insistent, growling lowly, pulling hard. It scared me. I'd never seen him like that. It was as if he was trying to tell me something terrible was happening. The wind blew stronger, and distant thunder rumbled, even without rain clouds. The air felt heavy, almost dense. Buddy began to run in circles, barking incessantly. I went out into the yard, trying to calm him, but he lunged forward, running toward the field, looking back, beckoning me with his eyes. My heart was pounding. "What do you want to show me?" I asked, not expecting an answer. He stopped, looked at me, and barked once, loud, dry, determined. It was then that I knew it. This wasn't a whim. It was a call. I grabbed my coat and followed. Buddy sprinted down the trail, and I followed, stumbling over rocks and leaves. The path was strewn with fallen branches. With each step, the feeling that something important awaited me grew. The silence of the woods was profound, broken only by his barking and the sound of my heart. When we reached the clearing, Buddy stopped suddenly. He looked at me, then at the ground, and barked loudly. The sound echoed through the trees. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. It was the same field where, years ago, they said there was an old, overgrown well. A shiver ran down my spine. "Buddy, what's here?" I asked, panting. He began digging frantically, throwing dirt everywhere. I approached and smelled the damp smell coming from below. The earth gave way a little, and the hollow sound confirmed it. Something was buried there. I brushed aside the leaves with my hands, and the ground revealed a moss-covered stone ledge. It was the well. The same one the woman on the corner had mentioned. My body froze. Buddy barked, looked at me, then back into the hole, as if begging me to listen. At first, I heard nothing. Just the distant echo of my own fear. But then, a soft, almost imperceptible sound reached me. A sound that made me freeze. It was like a wail. A faint, muffled cry, coming from deep within. I instinctively recoiled. "Oh my God!" I muttered, covering my mouth. Buddy continued to bark, pawing at the edge. My entire body trembled. I felt tears welling up, but I couldn't understand why. Everything inside me told me to run, but something stronger kept me from leaving. I ran to the house to get the flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it twice before I could hold it properly. When I returned, Buddy hadn't moved. He was waiting for me, alert, as if he knew I would return. I knelt at the edge of the well and shone my light inside. The light flickered. The walls were narrow, damp, and covered in ancient roots. I couldn't see the bottom, only a moving shadow. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo through the hole. Buddy barked again, and in that instant, I heard it. The sound was clear now, a cry, real, human, faint, but alive. I screamed for help, my voice piercing the silence of the woods. "Someone's here! Help! Someone, please!" I ran to the road, but no one answered. The wind carried my words. I ran back, panting, and knelt down again. "Hold on tight, honey, I'm going to get you out of there," I shouted, even though I couldn't see anyone. Buddy jumped beside me, desperate. It was then that I noticed something shining in the background, a blue fabric. My heart skipped a beat. The same shade as the cloth Buddy had brought back days ago. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Lord, help me," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Buddy, as if understanding, barked and looked at me. He turned toward the road, ran a few feet, and began barking into the air, calling. Minutes later, I heard voices in the distance. 2 young men from the neighboring farm appeared, startled by the noise. "What happened, Mary?" one of them asked. "There's someone down there," I replied, gasping. They came closer, looked at each other, and then exchanged shocked glances. One of them ran to get help. The other stayed with me, trying to calm me down. Buddy wouldn't stop barking. The sound of crying downstairs grew fainter, and my despair grew. I felt time stop. All I could do was pray. "Lord, don't let this child die. Please, God, hear me." I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. And in that moment, I realized that dog had known all along. Buddy lay near the edge, staring down, whimpering. I stroked his head and whispered, "You're my angel, Buddy. I don't know how, but the Lord sent you to do this." The sound of sirens began to draw closer. The red lights reflected off the trees, dancing on the leaves. The firefighters came running, asking what had happened. I could barely speak, I just pointed at the well. They threw ropes and flashlights, and began the rescue. I remained there, kneeling, with Buddy beside me, my heart racing. Time seemed to stand still. Every minute felt like an eternity. And then one of the firefighters yelled, "There's something here! Oh my God, there's a baby!" My body sagged. Tears came like a flood. Buddy barked loudly, once, twice, 3 times, as if thanking God. The men began to climb slowly, carrying the little one wrapped in a blue blanket, the same shade as the cloth Buddy had brought. I covered my mouth, sobbing. It was real. The baby was there. Alive. Buddy, quiet now, sat down beside me and looked at me. That look seemed to say, "I told you. I brought you here." And I knew, in that instant, that this wasn't just a street dog. He was an instrument of a miracle that was just beginning. But something still didn't make sense. The baby was cold, weak, but breathing. And the question no one could answer, not even the firefighters, began to echo in the air. How was he still alive after so long there? I glanced at Buddy, and he looked away, tired, lying on the ground. There were scratches on his paws and mud on his body. And deep in my heart, I felt a certainty that sent chills down my spine. That dog didn't just find the baby. He was there, caring for him. And what I would discover in the next few hours would prove that love, even the love of an animal, can carry a power that comes straight from heaven. Sirens cut through the silence of the road, illuminating the night with red and blue flashes. I could barely breathe. Buddy lay beside me, panting, but his eyes never left the shaft. The firefighters worked quickly, throwing ropes and lights, while one of them carefully climbed down the damp walls. With every second, my heart seemed to leap out of my chest. That sound, the crying, it was still there, fainter, but persistent. I heard it like an echo within my soul. I clutched the Bible to my chest and whispered a prayer. "Lord, don't let this little one suffer. Show us your power." The wind blew gently, and for an instant I smelled flowers, as if heaven were breathing near us. Suddenly, one of the firefighters yelled from below, "There's movement here. Something's breathing." The people who had gathered around held their breath. I moved closer to the edge, trying to see, but the flashlight's glare blinded me. Buddy barked once, twice, 3 times, as if in response. I already knew. The men began to pull the rope slowly. The tension was almost unbearable. The sound of the hook scraping against the stone mingled with the collective breathing of the crowd. And then, finally, the fireman emerged, the baby in his arms, wrapped in a dirty blue blanket, his face pale but alive. A cry of shock filled the air. Someone cried out loud. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "He's alive! My God, he's alive!" The firefighter placed the little one on a clean blanket, and another man began taking his heartbeat. "Weak, but steady," he said. "This baby has a powerful guardian angel." Buddy approached silently. He sat facing the scene, his tail still, his eyes fixed on the baby. I looked at him and noticed how badly he was shaking. His paws were raw, with fresh scratches and stuck on dirt. I reached out, stroked his head, and murmured, "You kept him alive, didn't you?" Paramedics rushed in, opened the ambulance, and placed the baby in a portable incubator. One of the doctors, confused, asked, "How long has he been here?" A firefighter replied, 3 days, maybe more." The doctor frowned. "It's impossible. He should be in deep hypothermia. But his body is warm." That sentence echoed inside me. Warm. 3 days in a freezing well, no food, no shelter, and still warm. Oh. I looked at Buddy, who remained motionless, panting, but with a calm look in his eyes, as if everything was all right now. A police officer approached and asked, "You were the one who called 911?" I nodded, still trembling. "But how did you know he was there?" I looked at Buddy and replied, "He brought me here. He was the one who listened, the one who insisted. I just followed." The man smiled in disbelief. "A dog did that." The neighbors began to gather, whispering, some crying, others just watching in silence. I remained there, kneeling, feeling the damp ground beneath my knees, unable to understand what was happening. It felt like a dream, one of those where you wake up and wonder if it was real. The sound of the ambulance starting woke me. "We're taking him to Austin Hospital," the paramedic said. "He needs immediate observation." I nodded, unable to speak. The officer asked if I wanted to come along. I hesitated, looked at Buddy, and he barked softly as if to say, "Go." On the way to the hospital, I clutched the Bible tightly in my lap. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the sound of the machines. The baby slept, wrapped in a clean blanket now. The doctor watched his vital signs, frowning. "It's like someone kept him warm the whole time," he murmured. I stared out the window, fighting back tears. Had Buddy stayed there, with him? Had his warm body, his paws on the blanket, kept him alive? The idea seemed impossible, but at the same time, it made too much sense to be a coincidence. When we arrived at the hospital, a team was waiting for us. Nurses rushed in, doctors gave orders. I stood still, watching the baby disappear down the white hallways, while a nurse offered me a glass of water. "You were the one who found him?" I nodded silently. "So God used your hands, dear," she said, smiling. I sat in the hallway and prayed. "Lord, if it was your will for this little one to live, show me what I must do now." The sound of hurried footsteps echoed, mixed with the beeping of the monitors. Time seemed to drag. Hours passed before the doctor returned. He wore a look of astonishment. "I don't know how to explain this," he said, sitting beside me. "This baby spent days in a dark well, without food, and yet his vital signs are stable. He didn't suffer from severe dehydration. And his body temperature never dropped too low. It's as if someone was protecting him." A chill ran down the back of my neck. I remembered Buddy's dirty paws, the dirt marks on his nose, the scratches on his shoulders. I remembered the blue blanket, the way he'd brought it to me, as if asking for help. I looked at the doctor, tears welling up again. "Someone protected him, yes," I whispered. "But it wasn't human." He looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. It was a dog. A pit bull. He found him, warmed him, and brought me to him. The doctor was silent for a few seconds, then simply shook his head in disbelief. "If that's true, ma'am, then we've just witnessed a miracle." When I returned home that night, the sky was clear and full of stars. Buddy was waiting for me at the gate. When he saw me, he slowly stood up, tired but with a serene look in his eyes. I knelt before him, hugged him, and cried, "You saved a life, Buddy. And maybe you saved mine too." He nuzzled my shoulder, and I lay there, feeling the warmth of his breath. For a moment, the whole world seemed to stop. There was no sound, no time, no fear, only the certainty that God truly works through the improbable. In the following days, the baby's story spread throughout the city. The newspapers read, "Elderly woman and stray dog find missing baby in well." I saw the headlines and shook my head in disbelief. I never imagined my simple life would become news. But despite the joy, something wouldn't leave me alone. There were unanswered questions. Who had left that baby there? And why did Buddy seem so distraught when he heard the crying? It was as if he knew more than any of us. One morning, the phone rang. He was the officer in charge of the case. "Ms. Mary, we've discovered something new. I think you'll want to hear it in person." My stomach churned. I sensed something big was about to be revealed. Buddy, as if sensing it, began to pace in circles again, restless, staring at the road. I stroked his head, trying to calm him. "It's going to be okay, my friend," I murmured, not believing my own words. And it was in that instant, amid the distant sound of cars and Buddy's muffled barking, that I felt the air shift again. The miracle of rescue had happened, but the real mystery, the why and how, was still only beginning. The morning after the rescue, the silence felt different. The air was light, but something inside me still pulsed, as if the miracle of the previous night hadn't ended. I stood on the porch, watching Buddy sleep at my feet. The sun touched his brown fur, and I could clearly see the wounds that had previously gone unnoticed. There were deep scratches on his paws, especially his front ones. His nails were worn, and small specks of dried blood stained his fur. I approached slowly and touched his paws. He whimpered softly but didn't flinch. I felt a pain in my chest, the same one you feel when you realize someone has suffered in silence for love. I grabbed a warm cloth and began to gently clean. Buddy stared at me, as if trying to say something without words. When I finished, he sighed and rested his head in my lap. "You were there before me, weren't you?" I whispered. "You stayed with that baby, trying to warm him up." The memory of the doctor's words came back to me. His body was warm. It was impossible. No baby could survive that long alone in a freezing well, unless something, or someone, had protected him. And the more I looked at Buddy, the more that certainty consumed me. I picked up the Bible from the table and opened it at random. My eyes fell on a verse that gave me chills. "The righteous take good care of their animals, but even the humblest are used by the Lord." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. I knew God had used that dog. Later, the doorbell rang. It was the police officer who had called me the day before. "May I come in, Ms. Mary?" I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. He carried a folder and a serious look. "There's something I need to show you." Buddy pricked up his ears suspiciously, but remained silent. The police officer opened the folder on the table. Inside were photos of the well, the marks on the floor, the blue blanket. "We found footprints all around the site," he said. "They're not human. They're dog footprints. And the most interesting thing is that they appear on different days, as if the animal had returned several times." My heart raced. I looked at Buddy, then back at the man. "Are you saying that?" he interrupted me. "I think your dog was there before the rescue. Maybe he was trying to protect the baby." My voice trailed off. "So it's true," the officer continued. "There are signs that someone tried to dig near the edge, as if trying to clear a passage. The ground was disturbed. And there was an area where the ground was clean, as if something or someone had been lying there." Buddy lowered his head, almost embarrassed, as if he understood. I couldn't hold back my tears. I hugged him tightly, and the officer looked away respectfully. I've never seen anything like it, ma'am. I've been on many rescues, but this feels like God's doing." I nodded silently. "Yes," I replied softly. "God acted here, and he used this little angel to do it." The officer left, promising to stay in touch. As I closed the door, the weight of reality sank in. Everything that had seemed like a coincidence now made sense. The blue cloth, the persistent barking, the strange behavior. Buddy had known all along. He'd seen that baby before. I sat in the armchair with him beside me. The sound of the wind rustled the curtains. "You kept him warm, didn't you?" I asked, stroking his nose. "You stayed there with him, in the cold, without food, just so he could live." Buddy looked up, and in that look was a tenderness indescribable. In the following days, reporters began to show up. They wanted photos, interviews, headlines. "The four-legged hero," they'd say. I tried to avoid the cameras. The story wasn't about fame. It was about faith. About a silent miracle, hidden in the mud and tears. One afternoon, an insistent reporter managed to get in. "Mrs. Mary, what did you feel when you realized your dog had saved the baby?" I took a deep breath and replied, "I felt God's presence. Because when everyone else gave up, he sent a hungry pit bull to do what no one else dared." Buddy was quiet the whole time, as if he understood they were talking about him. But at night, when the silence returned, he became restless. He would walk to the gate, look out at the field, and whimper. It was as if something out there was still calling to him. One day, the phone rang again. It was the hospital doctor. "Mrs. Mary, I need to tell you something curious," he said. "The baby is recovering well. But there's something strange." The staff noticed small marks on his skin, like light scratches, near his shoulder and ribs, as if something had gently held him. A shiver ran through me. I closed my eyes and imagined Buddy, curled up, hugging the little boy to protect him from the cold. "Do you think it might have been an animal?" I asked, my voice trembling. The doctor hesitated. "I don't know, ma'am. But if it was, that animal kept him alive." I hung up the phone and stood there for long minutes in silence. Then I knelt beside Buddy. "You did the impossible, my friend," I murmured. "You were God's hands and warmth in that dark hole." He pressed his nose against my forehead and closed his eyes. In the following days, I received an unexpected visit. The local sheriff, a tall, calm-spoken man, came to thank me personally. He brought with him a symbolic medal, engraved with the name, Buddy. "It's not much, ma'am, but this dog deserves recognition." I smiled, moved. "He doesn't need medals. He's already been blessed." When everyone left, the silence in the house felt heavier. I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Buddy was beside me, his head resting on my feet. "You know, I think God uses those who are willing to listen, even when the world no longer listens." But the peace was short-lived. That same night, a police car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers got out, one of them the same one who had been here earlier. "Mrs. Mary, we have new information about the baby's origin." My heart skipped a beat. Buddy stood up, tense. "We've discovered something that could change everything," the officer said, opening a folder. "The baby's mother lives on this very street. And we believe you knew her many years ago." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Old memories came rushing back, a forgotten face, a lost friendship, a scarring fight. "It can't be," I murmured. The police officer nodded. "It's her, Mary. The baby's mother is your old friend." Buddy, silent, leaned against my leg, as if telling me to brace myself. The wind blew hard, and the smell of earth filled the air again. I knew, deep down, that this miracle still had more to reveal. And it was in that moment that I realized God wasn't finished with the story. He was just beginning to show me why, and the past I thought I'd buried was about to emerge from the depths, along with the truth I'd been so afraid to face. The next day, I woke to the sound of the phone ringing. It was still dark, the sun had barely risen. On the other end, the doctor's voice sounded urgent. "Mrs. Mary, the baby you helped. We need to talk." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. "Is something wrong?" There was a pause. "You should come to the hospital." The walk there seemed longer than ever. The cold morning wind bit my face, and Buddy walked beside me, silent, as if he knew something important was about to happen. When I reached the reception desk, the nurse recognized me immediately. "Oh, you're the one from the well," he said with a nervous smile. "The doctor is waiting." I was led into a white, light-filled room. The doctor greeted me with a serious expression. "Please sit down." I obeyed, trying to remain calm. He held a clipboard and took deep breaths, as if searching for the right words. "This baby is a living miracle. And I'm not saying that metaphorically." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" The doctor stood and pointed to a screen where graphs and measurements appeared. "We've been studying the baby's body temperature, hydration status, and vital signs. It's impossible for him to have survived so long without food, water, and exposed to the cold of the night." I swallowed hard. "But he survived." The doctor nodded. "Yes. And that's what intrigues us. We found traces of soil under his fingernails, which indicates he was in contact with the ground. But his body shows signs of constant heat, as if he had been warmed regularly." "By whom?" I asked, my voice almost fading. He shook his head. "We don't know. No human being could stay in that well for so long without dying. But there were soft marks on the child's chest, as if someone or something had lain on top of her, protecting her from the cold." I fell silent. The images on the screen flickered before my eyes. Buddy. The dirty paws, the scratches, the blue blanket. It all made sense now. "Doctor," I murmured, what if it wasn't a person?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "The dog that led me there. He was missing for hours. When we found him, he was covered in mud. And the baby, he had the same earthy smell." The doctor was silent for a few seconds. Then he smiled slightly, without irony. "Do you believe he cared for the baby?" I nodded. "I don't believe it." "I know." He sighed. "So maybe this is the kind of thing science can't explain." Before leaving the room, he handed me a small plastic bracelet. "We found this near the blanket. It's from Austin Maternity Hospital. The baby was born a few days ago." I read the name printed in small letters. Samuel. I felt a shiver run through my body. Samuel, prophet's name. Back home, the silence seemed deeper. Buddy was waiting for me at the gate, as always. When I approached, he wagged his tail slowly, but I could tell he was tired. I sat down beside him, stroked his fur, and said, "You kept him alive, Buddy." The doctor confirmed it. "You kept him warm with your body." He lifted his head and looked me in the eye. I'll never forget that look, serene, yet filled with something greater, something that seemed to come from another world. "God used you, my friend," I whispered. "You were the blanket of the miracle." In the following days, the case took on unimaginable proportions. The newspapers called it the miracle of the well. Reporters from Dallas, Houston, and even California tried to speak to me. But I avoided the cameras. What happened there wasn't for headlines. It was for faith. One afternoon, a younger reporter asked me, "Do you really believe God worked through a dog?" I looked at him and said, "God works through those with pure hearts. And sometimes the purest hearts don't speak our language." He was silent for a few seconds before turning off the camera. Buddy began to appear in photos and news reports. The pit bull who became a hero. People came to leave food, toys, new collars. He accepted everything patiently, but his gaze remained distant, as if he were waiting for something. I knew. He still felt the call of the well. One night, I woke to the sound of the wind. I went to the window and saw Buddy sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. The moon illuminated his body, and for a moment, he looked different, more imposing, almost angelic. "What do you see, Buddy?" I asked softly. He slowly turned his face and stared at me. That look pierced my soul. I felt something was yet to happen. The miracle had saved a life, but it hadn't yet fulfilled God's intended purpose. The next morning, the police officer returned. "Mrs. Mary, we've discovered the baby's mother." My heart sank. He held an envelope. She lives a few blocks from here. She disappeared a few days ago. And the strangest thing, her name is Evelyn. My whole body trembled. Evelyn. The name echoed like a ghost from the past. It had been over 40 years since I'd heard that name. I remembered her face, smiling, full of life, my best friend from my youth. Until the day something tore us apart. Did she live here? The officer nodded. Yes, ma'am. And we believe the baby is hers. I felt the ground drop away from under my feet. Buddy came closer and rested his head on my knee, as if urging me to calm down. I remembered a long-ago night when Evelyn and I had our last conversation. The harsh words, the pride, the distance. And now, fate had brought us together again through a baby and a dog. The officer continued, "She's been missing since the day the baby disappeared. We think she might have tried to leave him in a safe place, but something went wrong." I closed my eyes, trying not to cry. And the Lord allowed Buddy to find him. When he left, I sat on the porch, Buddy beside me. The cool breeze touched my face. "You know, my friend, maybe God brought us together not just to save that baby. Maybe He wants to heal something that was broken a long time ago." Buddy lay at my feet, tired, and let out a long, almost human sigh. The sky was beginning to fill with stars, and a sense of peace washed over me. But at the same time, a restlessness, as if the true purpose was yet to come. I picked up the baby's bracelet and stared at it in the dim porch light. The name, Samuel, glowed in small letters. And in that moment, something inside me told me this baby would bring redemption, not just for Evelyn, but for me as well. Buddy lifted his head and barked once, looking toward the gate. It was as if confirming what my heart already knew: the miracle wasn't over yet. And it was there, on that silent night, that I realized God was just beginning to reveal the threads that connected that baby, that lost woman, and that dog that heaven itself seemed to have sent. That night was one of the longest of my life. I sat in the armchair with the baby's bracelet in my hands, turning it between my fingers. The name Samuel shone in the lamplight, and the longer I stared at it, the more my heart sank. The past, which I thought buried, was knocking loudly on my door again. It had been 40 years since I'd last seen Evelyn. 40 years since we stopped speaking. It's strange how time flies, and yet certain pains remain fresh. Back then, we were inseparable. We grew up together, went to the same school, shared dreams and secrets. Until the day pride came between us. I remember the summer of 1983. The heat was stifling, and Evelyn showed up at my house crying. She told me something I couldn't hear with my heart at the time. She was pregnant, and the child's father had left. Scared and self-righteous, I judged her. I said harsh words, believing I was doing the right thing. And that's how I lost my best friend. Buddy lay at my feet, but he seemed attentive, as if he understood every memory that passed through me. "I failed her, Buddy," I murmured. "And now, her son has ended up in a well." As if fate wanted to show me the price of silence and lack of compassion. The tears came without asking permission. I looked at the crucifix on the wall and whispered, "Lord, why now? Why make me relive all this?" The wind blew through the window, making the curtains dance, and I felt a sudden peace. Maybe God didn't want to punish me. Maybe He wanted to redeem me. The next day, I went to the police station. I wanted to know if they'd found Evelyn. The officer greeted me with a serious expression. "Not yet, Mrs. Mary. But we've confirmed that the baby is indeed hers. The DNA leaves no doubt." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back tears. "Evelyn, where have you been, my friend?" I walked home with a heavy heart. Buddy walked beside me, his steps slow. When we arrived, he lay down on the porch, exhausted. I sat beside him and let the silence speak for us. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. "I knew this baby would bring something back from my past." During the night, I dreamed of Evelyn. She called my name, the same soft tone of voice as when we were young. She stood in a field, surrounded by yellow flowers, and she smiled. When I tried to approach, she pointed to something on the ground, a crib shrouded in light. I woke crying, her name echoing in my head. I decided I needed to find her. I spent the day walking around, asking neighbors, showing them an old photo of us. Some remembered her vaguely. She lived with an older woman, I think she was her aunt, one woman said. But she moved out suddenly, before winter. The more I searched, the more it seemed Evelyn had vanished into thin air. The only remaining link was the baby. And, somehow, Buddy. He was glued to me, but he also seemed restless, as if sensing something on the horizon. That afternoon, I sat with him under the shade of the tree in the backyard. I picked up my Bible and began reading the book of Ruth. When I came to the verse that said, "Wherever you go, I will go with you," I felt a shiver. It was exactly the kind of friendship Evelyn and I had, until pride tore us apart. The phone rang, interrupting my reading. It was the hospital. "Mrs. Mary, the baby is getting better. But there's something curious. He reacts strongly to the sound of a dog barking. Every time a dog passes in the parking lot, he gets agitated and tries to turn his head." I remained silent, my heart racing. Buddy's ears pricked up at my trembling voice. "He misses you," I said, caressing him. "He must think he's still in that well, waiting for you." The tears fell again, hot and silent. "You were the first hug he ever knew, Buddy. The first warmth." That night, I went to visit the baby. When I arrived at the hospital, the nurses let me see him through the incubator window. Samuel slept peacefully, his face serene, almost angelic. I placed my hand against the glass and whispered, "Your mother will come back, my love. God doesn't perform miracles by halves." As I watched, I noticed a detail that took my breath away. On her cheek, a small birthmark, a faded little heart. Evelyn had one just like it, in the same place. I remembered when we played as children, and I'd call it an angel's kiss. I left the hospital with my heart on fire. The wind seemed to whisper her name. Evelyn. Evelyn. With each step, the memories came back like waves. Her laughter, the late-night conversations, the day we swore we'd never be apart. And, most of all, the moment I broke that promise. Buddy was waiting for me at the door, lying down, his eyes full of tenderness. "I need to fix this," I told him. "God is giving me a second chance. And you are the messenger of that grace." He barked softly as if to say, "Go." The next day, I left early and went to an old house on the hill, where Evelyn lived with her aunt. The place looked abandoned. The windows were broken, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. I entered slowly, calling her name. "Evelyn." "It's me, Mary." The echo of my voice sounded sad. In the room, I found an old suitcase open, clothes strewn about, and on the bed, a photo of us from our youth. We were hugging, smiling. On the back, a handwritten phrase, "God forgives those who love." I felt the ground disappear. I picked up the photo and held it to my chest, crying like I hadn't in years. "Evelyn, if you can hear me, forgive me." The wind blew through the broken window, and for a moment, I swear I smelled a familiar perfume, the same one she'd worn when we were young. I returned home exhausted, but something in me was different. Buddy came toward me, tail wagging. "I found her, somehow," he said. "She left a message. And I think God will lead me to her." The sunset was tinting the sky red when I heard the phone ring again. It was the police officer. "Mrs. Mary, we've found something new. The baby's mother was seen near St. Helena's Church last night. Alone, confused, and asking for help." My body froze. "Is she alive?" "Yes, ma'am. We're on our way." I looked at Buddy. He was already on his feet, as if he knew what was coming next. "Come on, kid," he said, grabbing my bag. "Time to close the circle." He barked once, firmly, and ran to the gate. As the car drove off, I looked up at the darkening sky. The wind carried the scent of rain and redemption. And inside me, something whispered, sometimes God uses love to reconnect us with what we left behind. I didn't know what awaited me when I met Evelyn again, but I was certain of one thing. The same God who had led Buddy to that well was now leading me back to the heart I had lost. The sky was cloudy when the police car pulled up in front of the small St. Helena Church. The bell rang in the distance, slow and solemn, as if time itself had slowed. I got out of the car with trembling hands, my heart racing, and a lump in my throat. Buddy stood beside me, alert, sniffing the air, as if he knew exactly what we were about to encounter. Across the street, a thin, gray-haired woman in simple clothes sat on the church steps. Even from a distance, I recognized her posture, the way her hands rested on her knees. Evelyn. The name echoed within me like an ancient prayer. I felt tears welling up before I even took the first step. The police officer looked at me gently. "She asked for you," he said quietly. "She said she needed to see you before going anywhere." I nodded, speechless. Each step toward her felt like crossing 40 years of silence, regret, and longing. When I approached, she slowly raised her head. Our eyes met. For a moment, time stood still. She brought her hand to her mouth in surprise. "Mary," she whispered, her voice breaking. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "It's me, Evelyn." She struggled to her feet. For a moment, I thought she might faint. I went over and held her hands. They were cold, fragile. "My God! I thought I'd never see you again," she said, crying. "Neither would I," I replied, and hugged her. We cried together, right there on the church steps, with the wind blowing and Buddy lying beside us like a silent guardian. The hug lasted for several long minutes. When we pulled away, Evelyn looked at me with teary eyes. "You saved my son, Mary." I shook my head. "No, my friend, it was God. And he used a four-legged angel to do it." She looked at Buddy and smiled, touching his nose tenderly. "Did he find him?" I nodded, overcome with emotion. "Yes. He kept him warm. He protected him until we could get there." Evelyn fell to her knees and began to cry. "I left him there, Mary. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I thought someone would find him soon. But then, I got lost." I knelt beside her and held her hands. "Sure, you don't need to explain. God has already forgiven you, Evelyn. And so have I." She looked at me, surprised, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "After everything I said to you? After what I did?" I took a deep breath. "I made mistakes too. I judged you when I should have embraced you. I pushed you away when you needed me most. Maybe that's why God brought Samuel, so we could find each other again and learn what true love is." She pressed her forehead against mine and cried softly. Buddy, as if understanding the moment, placed a paw on her knee. "Thank you," Evelyn murmured. "Thank you for listening to the call." I smiled, tears streaming down my face. "He heard it. I just followed the bark." The church priest approached silently. "You two have much to discuss. But first, let me say, this reunion is an answer to prayer. God has never stopped caring for you." He made the sign of the cross and walked away, leaving us there, immersed in sacred silence. We entered the church together. The sound of pews creaking echoed through the empty hall. I knelt before the altar and closed my eyes. "Lord," I whispered, "thank you for bringing us here. I know the road has been long, but your mercy is infinite." Beside me, Evelyn did the same. As we prayed, Buddy lay at the foot of the altar, his nose resting on his paws. The candlelight reflected in his eyes, making them shine as if they were made of gold. And for a moment, I swear I saw something beyond flesh, a light, a presence, something heavenly. Evelyn took my hand. "Mary, I want to see my son." I smiled, wiping away my tears. "He's in the hospital, recovering. His name is Samuel." She smiled tenderly. "Samuel. The same name I chose when I found out I was pregnant. Did you know?" I shook my head. "No. I think God remembered it for us." We walked out of the church, arms around each other. The rain began to fall lightly, washing away the ground, the pain, and the past. Buddy walked ahead, his collar dangling like a sacred ribbon. When we reached the car, Evelyn looked at me and said, "I thought God had forgotten me." I cupped her face. "He never forgets, Evelyn. He just waits for the right moment to find us." On the way to the hospital, the silence was full of meaning. Evelyn stared out the window, tears mixing with the rain. "You know what's strangest?" she said, her voice trembling. "I dreamed about you, Mary. I dreamed you were coming to get me. And beside you was a dog. The same one that's there now. I glanced at Buddy in the rearview mirror. He was serene, staring down the road, as if he knew exactly where we were going. So the dream was a prophecy, I replied. Because that's exactly what happened. Evelyn smiled, closing her eyes. God always warns. We're the ones who don't listen. When we arrived at the hospital, the nurse led us to the room. Samuel was asleep, breathing calmly, his face serene. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her hands trembling. My God, he's so beautiful. I walked over and placed my hand on her shoulder. Go, he's waiting for you. She approached slowly, touched the baby's face, and burst into tears. I'm sorry, my love. Mommy never wanted to leave you. The baby opened his eyes briefly and made a faint sound, almost a whisper. Evelyn hugged him, and for a moment, time vanished. I watched in silence, my heart full. Buddy sat beside me, watching the scene. I crouched down and said, You made this happen, my friend. This is the miracle God entrusted to you. He wagged his tail slowly, nuzzling my hand. The doctor came in and smiled. I've never seen anything like it. It's like he was waiting for her. Evelyn, still hugging the baby, looked at me. Mary, you gave me back everything I lost. I shook my head. No, Evelyn. It was faith. It was love. As the sun began to rise, light streamed through the hospital windows, bathing the room in a golden glow. Evelyn, the baby, and Buddy seemed enveloped in an aura of peace. It was as if heaven itself had descended for a moment. But something inside me told me this miracle had one last lesson. I looked at Buddy and felt a pang in my heart. He looked tired, quieter than usual, his eyes tender but distant. Stay with me, boy, I whispered. He looked at me one last time before closing his eyes and sighing deeply. I didn't understand what was happening. I touched his head, and he was still breathing, but slowly. Evelyn noticed my desperation and came to me. What happened? I shook my head, tears returning. I think he accomplished his mission. And in that moment, I realized that the true miracle wasn't just the baby's survival or Evelyn's reunion. It was the unconditional love of a creature God used to restore two lost souls. Buddy took a deep breath, and an immense peace filled the room. The baby smiled in his mother's arms, and a ray of sunlight touched his nose. I closed my eyes, crying, and whispered, Thank you, Lord. Thank you for sending us an angel disguised as a dog. And it was there, amidst tears and light, that I understood, true love, the kind that comes from God, never dies. It just changes form. In the days following our reunion, the house was filled with a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The wind blew softer, and even the birds seemed to sing differently. Evelyn and little Samuel began visiting me every day. The baby laughed when he saw Buddy, and that sound, so pure, so full of life, filled every corner of my soul. Buddy, however, was quieter. He seemed to have aged overnight. He slept for long hours, got up slowly, but still watched Samuel with his usual protective gaze. Evelyn said he had the eyes of a saint, and I believed her. One morning, I woke before sunrise and found Buddy lying on the porch, staring at the horizon. I sat beside him. The sky was golden, and a light breeze touched our faces. You know, my friend, I began, you changed everything here. You saved a life, and you saved my faith. He turned his face and looked at me, that deep gaze that seemed to pierce my soul. I touched his head and felt the soft warmth beneath my hand. God used you, Buddy. You were the instrument of his love. A tear fell silently, and he wagged his tail slowly, as if to say he understood. Evelyn arrived shortly afterward with Samuel in her arms. He asked to come see his friend, she said, smiling. The baby reached out to Buddy, who, though weak, approached, sniffed the child's face, and lightly licked his cheek. Samuel laughed, a sound so sweet it seemed to echo through the heavens. We all sat together on the porch, silent. The sun rose, illuminating the yard, and I noticed how every detail, the rustling of the leaves, the smell of the earth, the morning warmth, seemed to take on new meaning. It was as if the whole world were breathing gratitude. Days later, we were invited to a special service at St. Helena Church. The priest wanted to celebrate the miracle of the well. When we arrived, The church was packed. People who had never spoken to each other before were there, crying, praying, hugging strangers. God's love had spread throughout the city. The priest told the story calmly, without exaggeration. God sent a dog to do what men have forgotten, hear the cry of an innocent. The words echoed in the temple like fire on dry wood. Everyone stood and applauded. Evelyn was crying. So was I. Buddy slept peacefully at my feet, serene, as if he knew he was the protagonist of something divine. After Mass, an elderly woman approached me. "Honey, God still has plans for you. Sometimes He uses the past to open a new path." I smiled, moved. "I think He already has." I looked at Evelyn, who was rocking Samuel in her arms, singing an old song we used to sing when we were young. By then, Buddy wasn't eating much anymore. He spent his days lying still, watching the world with his sweet eyes. The vet said he was just tired, maybe from age. But I knew. He was getting ready to go. One silent morning, I woke and felt something was different. The air was still, the sound of birds gone. I went to the backyard and found him there, lying under the shade of the tree, his body serene, his eyes peaceful. I knelt and hugged him, crying, "Thank you, my angel. You fulfilled your mission." Evelyn arrived soon after, bringing Samuel. The three of us stood there, 2 women and a child, embraced in silence, as the wind stirred the leaves and the sky opened in shades of gold. "He brought us together," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes," I replied. "And now he's back where he belongs." We buried Buddy under the big tree in the backyard, the same place he loved to rest. We placed flowers around him and a small wooden cross with his name hand-engraved on it. Samuel, even so small, touched the cross with his tiny hands and mumbled something that sounded like, "Goodbye." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the balcony and looked up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter. I closed my eyes and said a prayer. "Lord, thank you for showing us what true love is. Thank you for sending us an angel when we needed it most." Suddenly, a warm breeze blew across my face, and for a moment, I swear I heard a distant, soft bark coming from nowhere. I smiled. "I know it's you, Buddy." Tears streamed down my face, but this time they were tears of peace. The months passed. Evelyn began working at the church, helping single mothers. I returned to sewing, and Samuel grew up healthy, always smiling when he saw dogs. Sometimes he'd point to the yard and say, "Buddy." Evelyn and I would look at each other and just smile. One afternoon, I decided to embroider something special. I took a white blanket and wrote on it in gold thread, "Angels don't have wings, sometimes they have paws." I placed it on the sofa as an eternal reminder that God's love can manifest itself in the simplest and most unexpected ways. Every now and then, when the wind blows hard, the church bell rings on its own, even without anyone pulling the rope. Evelyn says it's Buddy reminding us to pray. And I believe him. Because after that miracle, I learned that heaven is closer than we imagine. Samuel now crawls around the yard and always stops under the tree where Buddy rests. He stands there, staring into space, waving his hands in the air, as if seeing something invisible to me. "You see him, don't you, my love?" I ask softly. The baby smiles and looks up at the sky. Evelyn, in turn, hugs me and says, "Mary, God used you to heal my soul." I reply, "It wasn't me. It was faith. It was the love He planted in us, the same love Buddy taught us." Today, as the sun sets, I sit on the porch and close my eyes. I can still feel the light weight of his head in my lap, the sound of his calm breathing. And every time the wind touches my face, I remember that God's love lives on, blowing, guiding, comforting. The well is still there, now fenced off and covered in flowers. People call it the miracle well. Sometimes children leave toys there in honor of the dog who saved a baby. I pass by, make the sign of the cross, and smile. And every time I hear a distant bark, I know it's him, reminding me that love is never lost. It just changes shape and carries on. And so, between pain and redemption, I learned the most beautiful lesson of my life. God is never late. He arrives at just the right time. Even if He comes with 4 legs and a heart of light. Sometimes life breaks us into pieces we think impossible to rebuild. But God, oh, God always has a way of putting everything back together. Sometimes He uses time. Sometimes He uses people. And every now and then, He sends an angel disguised as a dog to remind us that His love never fails. Buddy came into my life when I thought I'd seen it all. I was tired, lonely, and thought my purposeful days were over. But it was there, in the simplicity of a canine gaze and the rescue of a helpless baby, that the heavens opened up again. Today, when I look back, I realize that every tear, every hope, and every prayer was answered, not in the way I expected, but in the way I needed. And perhaps this is how God works, transforming the improbable into a miracle, failure into redemption, and fear into living faith. Samuel grows up healthy, full of life and joy. Evelyn has found peace again. And I have found forgiveness. The dry well has become a garden, and each flower that blooms there is a reminder of God's love, a love that reaches even the deepest places, where hope seems to be lost. And if you've listened to me this far, I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Never doubt God's ways. He can use anything, even a dog's bark, to remind you that you are not alone. Have you ever experienced something that seemed impossible and suddenly turned into a blessing? Have you ever felt like God sent you a sign, but you almost didn't notice? I'd love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And before you go, I ask you to do something simple but powerful. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll help this message reach more hearts, and perhaps someone who needs a miracle today. May God bless you with health, peace, and faith. And every time you hear a distant bark, remember, it might just be a reminder that heaven is still watching over you. Amen.